My Side of the Mountain by Gene Craighead George. Day 8. Matt put down his pencil and thought, well, I ran away once because I thought how sorry everybody would be when I was gone. How they'd cry and wish they'd be nicer to me. He laughed. Then I said, I ran away once because I wanted to do something else. That's a good reason, said Matt. Do you suppose that's why? By the way, what is his name? I never asked him, I said truthfully. What do you suppose he really eats and lives on? Asked Matt. Fish, roots, berries, nuts, rabbits. There's a lot of food around the woods if you look for it, I guess. Roots? Roots wouldn't be good. Well, carrots are roots. By golly, they are, and so are potatoes, sort of. Fish? Pondered Matt. I suppose there are lots of fish around here. The streams are full of them. You've really seen him, huh? He really is in these mountains? Sure, I've seen him, I said. Finally, I stood up. I gotta get home. I go the other way. You just follow this road to the town, and I think you can get a bus from there. Now wait, he said. Let me read it back to you to check the details. Sure. Matt stood up, blew on his hands, and read, The wild boy of the Catskills does exist. He has dark brown hair, black eyes, and wears a handsome deerskin suit that he apparently made himself. He is ruddy and in excellent health, and is able to build a fire with flint and steel as fast as a man can light a match. His actual dwelling is a secret, but his means of support is a beautiful falcon. The falcon flies off the boy's fist and kills rabbits and pheasants when the boy needs food. He only takes what he needs. The boy's name is not known, but he ran away from home and never went back. No, Matt, no, I begged. I was about to wrestle it out of him when he said furtively, I'll make a deal with you. Let me spend my spring vacation with you, and I won't print a word of it. I'll write only what you've told me. I looked at him and decided that it might be nice to have him. I said, I'll meet you outside town any day you say, providing you let me blindfold you and lead you to my home, and providing you promise not to have a lot of photographers hiding in the woods. Do you know what would happen if you told on me? Sure, the newsreels would roll up. TV cameras would arrive, reporters would hang in the trees, and you'd be famous. Yes, and back in New York City. I'll write you what you said, and not even your mother will recognize you. Make it some other town, and it's a deal, I said. You might say I'm working for civil defense, doing research by learning to live off the land. Tell them not to be afraid, that crayfish are delicious and caves are warm. Matt liked that. He sat down again. Tell me some of the plants and animals you eat so that they will know what to do. We can make this informative. I sat down and listed some of the better wild plants and more easily obtainable mammals and fish. I gave him a few good recipes and told him that I didn't recommend anyone trying to live off the land unless they liked oysters and spinach. Matt liked that. He wrote and wrote. Finally, he said, My hands are cold. I'd better go. But I'll see you on April 12th at 12:30 outside of town, okay? And just to prove that I'm a man of my word, I'll bring you a copy of what I write. Well, you better not give me away. I have a scout in civilization who follows all these stories. We shook hands and he departed at a brisk pace. I returned to my patch on the mountain, talking to myself all the way. I talk to myself a lot, but everyone does. The human being, even in the midst of people, spends 9/10 of his time alone with the private voices of his own head. Living alone on a mountain is not much different except that your speaking voice gets rusty. I talked inside my head all the way home, thinking up schemes, holding conversations with Bando and Dad and Matt Spell. I worded the article for Matt after discussing it with Bando and made it sound very convincing without giving myself up. I kind of wanted to write it down and send it to Matt, but I didn't. I entered my tree, tied frightful to the bedpost, and there was Jesse Coon James. It had been months since I'd seen him. He was curled up on my bed asleep. A turtle shell that had been full of cracked walnuts was empty beside him. He awoke, jumped to the floor, and walked slowly between my legs and out the door. I had the feeling Jesse was hoping I had departed for good, and that he could have my den. He was a comfort-loving creature. I was bigger and my hands were freer than his, so he conceded me the den. I watched him climb over the Baron's rock and shinny up a hemlock. He moved heavily into the limbs, and it occurred to me that Jesse was a she Jesse, not a he Jesse. I cooked supper and then sat down by my little fire and called a forum. It is very sociable inside my head, and I have perfected the art of getting a lot of people arguing together in silence, or at a forum, as I prefer to call it. I can get 4 people all talking at once, and a 5th can be present, but generally I can't get him to talk. Usually these forums discuss such thing as a storm, and whether or not it's coming, how to make a spring suit, how to enlarge my house without destroying the life in the tree. Tonight, however, they discussed what to do about Matt's spell. Dad kept telling me to go right down to the city and make sure he published nothing, not even a made-up story. Bando said, "No, it's all right. He still doesn't know where you live." And then Matt walked into the conversation and said that he wanted to spend his spring vacation with me, and that he promised not to do anything untoward. He kept using untoward. I don't know where he got that expression, but he liked it, and he kept using it, and that's how I knew Matt was speaking. Everything was untoward. That night I fell asleep with all these people discussing the probability of my being found and hauled back to the city. Suddenly Frightful broke into the conversation. She said, "Don't let that Matt come up here. He eats too much." That was the first time that Frightful had ever talked in a forum. I was delighted, for I was always sure that she had more to say than a few cries. She had not missed Matt's appetite. The forum dissolved in a good humor, everyone being delighted with Frightful. I lifted my head to look at her. She had her beak and the feathers of her back, sound asleep. She spoke in my head, however, and said, "You really want to be found, or you would not have told Matt all you did." "I like you better when you don't talk," I said, pulled the deer hide over me, and fell into a deep sleep, in which I'll cooperate with the ending. By the middle of March, I could have told you it was spring without looking. Jessie did not come around anymore. She was finishing the rewarding waters of the open stream. She was returning to a tree hollow full of babies. The bear and weasel did not come by. There were salamanders and frogs to keep them busy. The chickadees sang alone, not in a winter group, and the skunks and minks and foxes found food more abundant in the forest than at my treehouse. The circumstances that had brought us all together in the winter were no more. There was food on the land, and the snow was slipping away. By April, I was no longer living off my storehouse. There were bulbs, tubers, and greens to be had. Meals were varied once more. There were frogs' legs, eggs, and turtle soup on my table. I took my baths in the spring again rather than in the turtle shell with warmed over snow. I plunged regularly into the ice water of the spring, shouting as my breath was grabbed from my lungs. I scrubbed, ran for my tree, and dried myself before the fire, shouting as I stepped into my clothes. Then I would sing. I made up a lot of nice songs after my bath, one of which I taught to a man who was hiking along the top of the gorge one day. He said his name was Aaron, and he was quiet and tall. I found him sitting on the edge of the cliff looking across the valley. He was humming little tunes. He had a sad smile that never went away. I knew I would not have to hide from him just by looking at him, so I walked up and sat down beside him. I taught him my cold water song. I learned he wrote songs and that he was from New York. He had come to the Catskills for the Passover festivities and had wandered off for the day. He was about to go back when I sat down and said, "I heard you humming." "Yes," he said. "I hum a good deal. Can you hum?" "Yes," I replied. "I can hum. I hum a good deal too, and even sing, especially when I get out of the spring in the morning. Then I really sing aloud." "Let's hear you sing aloud." So I said, feeling very relaxed with the sun shining on my head. "All right, I'll sing you my cold water song." "I like that," Aaron said. "Sing it again." So I did. "Let me suggest a few changes." He changed a few words to fit the tune and the tune to fit the words, and then we both sang it. "Mind if I use the hum, 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 dee dee part?" he asked presently. "You can use it all," I said. "Tunes are free up here. I got that from the red-eyed vireo." He sat up and said, "What other songs are sung up here?" I whistled him the High Chickadee song of the black-capped Mr. Brackett, and the waterfall song of the wood thrush. He took out a card, lined it with 5 lines, and wrote in little marks. I stretched back in the sun and hummed the song of the brown thrasher and of barometer, the nuthatch. Then I boomed out the song of the great horned owl and stopped. "That's enough, isn't it?" I asked. "I guess so." He lay back and stretched, looked into the leaves, and said, "If I do something with this, I'll come back and play it to you. I'll bring my portable organ." "Fine," I said. Then after a drowsy pause, he said, "Will you be around these parts this summer?" "I'll be around," I said. Aaron fell asleep and rolled over in the sun. I liked him. He hadn't asked me one personal question. Oddly enough, I wasn't sure whether that made me glad or not. Then I thought of the words Frightful had spoken in my head. "You want to be found." And I began to wonder, I had sought out a human being. This would not have happened a year ago. I fell asleep. When I awoke, Erin was gone, and Frightful was circling me. She saw me stir, swooped in, and sat on a rock beside me. I said hi, but did not get up, just lay still listening to the birds, the snips, and the spots of the insects moving in the dry leaves, and the air stirring the newly leafing trees. Nothing went on in my head. It was comfortably blank. I knew the pleasures of the lizard on the log who knows where his next meal is coming from. I also knew his boredom. After an hour, I did have a thought. Aaron had said that he was up in the Catskills for Passover. Then it must be also near Easter, and Matt would be coming soon. I had not counted notches in weeks. A cool shadow crossed my face, and I arose, whistled for Frightful to come to my hand, and wandered slowly home, stuffing my pockets with spring beauty bulbs as I went. Several days later, I met Matt on Route 27 at 3:30. I tied his handkerchief around his eyes and led him, stumbling and tripping up the mountain. I went almost directly home. I guess I didn't much care if he remembered how to get there or not. When I took off the blindfold, he looked around. Where are we? Where's your house? I sat down and motioned him to sit. He did so with great willingness. In fact, he flopped. Where do you sleep on, the ground? I pointed to the deerskin flaps moving in the wind in the hemlock. What'd you do? Live in a tree? Yep. Matt bounced to his feet, and we went in. I propped the door open so that the light streamed in, and he shouted with joy. I lit the tallow candle, and we went over everything, and each invention he viewed with a shout. While I prepared trout, baked in wild grape leaves, Matt sat on the bed and told me the world news in brief. I listened with care to the trouble in Europe, the trouble in the Far East, and the trouble in the South, and the trouble in America. Also to a few sensational murders, some ball scores, and his report card. It all proves my point, I said sagely. People live too close together. Is that why you are here? Well, not exactly. The main reason is that I don't like to be dependent, particularly on electricity, rails, steam, coal, oil, machines, and all those things that can go wrong. Well, is that why you're up here? Well, not exactly. Some men climbed Mount Everest because it was there. Here is a wilderness. Is that why? Come on, Matt. See that falcon? Hear those white-throated sparrows? Smell that skunk? Well, the falcon takes the sky, the white-throated sparrow takes the low bushes, the skunk takes the earth. You take the newspaper office. I take the woods. Don't you get lonely? Lonely? I've hardly had a quiet moment since arriving. Stop being a reporter and let's eat. Besides, there are people in the city who are lonelier than I. Okay, let's eat. This is good. Darn good. In fact, the best meal I've ever eaten. He ate and stopped asking questions. We spent the next week fishing, hunting, trapping, gathering greens and bulbs. Matt talked less and less, slept, hiked, and pondered. He also ate well and kept Frightful very busy. He made himself a pair of moccasins out of a deer hide and a hat that I can't even describe. We didn't have a mirror, so he never knew how it looked. But I can say this. When I happened to meet him as we came fishing along a stream bed, I was always startled. I never did get used to that hat. Toward the end of the week, who should we find sleeping in my bed after returning from a fishing trip but Bando? Spring vacation, he said. That night we played our reed whistles for Matt by an outdoor fire. It was that warm. Matt and Bando also decided to make a guest house out of one of the other trees. I said yes, let's, because I felt that way, although I knew what it meant. A guest house meant I was no longer a runaway. I was no longer hiding in the wilderness. I was living in the woods like anyone else lives in a house. People drop by, neighbors come for dinner. There are 3 meals to get, the shopping to do, the cleaning to accomplish. I felt exactly as I felt when I was home. The only difference was that I was a little harder to visit out here, but not too hard. There sat Matt and Bando. We all burned and dug out another hemlock. I worked with them, wondering what was happening to me. Why didn't I cry? No. What made me happily build a city in the forest? Because that is what we were doing. When the tree was done, Bando had discovered that the sap was running in willow trees and the limbs were just right for slide whistles. He spent the evening making us trombones. We played them together. That word, together. Maybe that was the answer to the city. Matt said rather uncomfortably just before bedtime, there may be some photographers in these hills. Matt, I hardly protested. What did you write? It was Bando who pulled out the article. He read it, a few follow-ups and comments from many other papers. Then he leaned back against his leaning tree, as if it had come to be, and puffed silently on his pipe. Let's face it, Thoreau, you can't live in America today and be quietly different. If you are going to be different, you are going to stand out. and people are going to hear about you. And in your case, if they hear about you, they will remove you to the city or move to you, and you won't be different anymore. A pause. Did the owls nest, Thurl? I told him about the owls and how the young played around the hemlock, and then we went to bed a little sad. All of us. Time was running out. Matt had to return to school, and Bando stayed on to help burn out another tree for another guest house. We chopped off the blackened wood, made one bed, and started the second before he had to return to his teaching. I wasn't alone long. Mr. Jacket found me. I was out on the raft trying to catch an enormous snapping turtle. It would take my line, but when I got its head above water, it would eye me with those cold, ancient eyes and let go. Frightful was nearby. I was making a noose to throw over the turtle's head the next time it surfaced, when Frightful lit on my shoulder with a thud and a hard grip. She was drawn up and tense, which in her language said people, so I wasn't surprised to hear a voice call from across the stream. Hi, Daniel Boone. What are you doing? There stood Mr. Jacket. I'm trying to get this whale of a snapper, I said in such an ordinary voice that it was dull. I went on with the noose making, and he called to me, Hit it with a club. I still couldn't catch the old tiger, so I rafted ashore and got Mr. Jacket. About an hour later, we had the turtle, had it cleaned, and I knew that Mr. Jacket was Tom Sidler. Come on up to the house, I said, and he came on up to the house, and it was just like after school on 3rd Avenue. He wanted to see everything, of course, and he did think it unusual, but he got over it in a hurry and settled down to helping me prepare the meat for turtle soup. He dug the onions for it while I got it boiling in a tin can. Turtle is as tough as rock and has to be boiled for hours before it gets tender. We flavored the soup with hickory salt and cut a lot of Salmon's seal tubers into it. Tom said it was too thin, and I thickened it with mashed up nuts. I had run out of acorn flour. I tried some orris root in it. Pretty fair. Want to stay and eat it and spend the night? I asked him somewhere along the way. He said sure, but added that he had better go home and tell his mother. It took him about 2 hours to get back, and the turtle was still tough, so we went out to the meadow to fly Frightful. She caught her own meal. We tied her to her perch and climbed in the gorge until almost dark. We ate turtle soup. Tom slept in the guest tree. I lay awake wondering what had happened. Everything seemed so every day. I liked Tom, and he liked me, and he came up often, almost every weekend. He told me about his bowling team and some of his friends. I began to feel I knew a lot of people in town below the mountain. This made my wilderness small. When Tom left one weekend, I wrote this down. Tom said that he and Reed went into an empty house, and when they heard the real estate man come in, they slid down the laundry chute to the basement and crawled out the basement window. He said a water main broke and flooded the school grounds, and all the kids took off their shoes and played baseball in it. I drew a line through all this, and then I wrote, I haven't seen the Baron Weasel. I think he has deserted his den by the boulder. A catbird is nesting nearby. Apparently it has learned that Frightful is tied some of the time, because it comes right up to the fireplace for scraps when the leash is snapped. I drew a line through this too, and filled the rest of the piece of bark with a drawing of Frightful. I went to the library the next day and took out 4 books. Aaron came back. He came right to the hemlock forest and called. I didn't ask him how he knew I was there. He stayed a week, mostly puttering around with the willow whistles. He never asked what I was doing on the mountain. It was as if he already knew, as if he had talked to someone or read something, and there was nothing more to question. I had the feeling that I was an old story somewhere beyond the foot of the mountain. I didn't care. Bando got a car and he came up more often. He never mentioned any more newspaper stories, and I never asked him. I just said to him one day, I seem to have an address now. Yes, or he said, you do. I said, it is Broadway and 42nd Street? He said, almost. His eyebrows knitted, and he looked at me sadly. It's all right, Bando. Maybe you'd better bring me a shirt and some blue jeans when you come next time. I was thinking if they haven't sold that house in town, maybe Tom and I could slide down the laundry chute. Bando slowly turned a willow whistle over in his hands. He didn't play it. In which the city comes to me. The warblers arrived. The trees turned summer green, and June burst over the mountain. It smelled good, tasted good, and was gentle to the eyes. I was stretched out on the big rock in the meadow one morning. Frightful was jabbing at some insect in the grass below me when suddenly a flashbulb exploded and a man appeared. Wild boy, he said, and took another picture. What are you doing, eating nuts? I sat up. My heart was heavy. It was so heavy that I posed for him, holding Frightful on my fist. I refused to take him to my tree, however, and he finally left. Two other photographers came and a reporter. I talked a little. When they left, I rolled over on my stomach and wondered if I could get in touch with the Department of Interior and find out more about the public lands in the West. My next thought was the baseball game in the flooded schoolyard. 4 days passed, and I talked to many reporters and photographers. At noon on the fifth day, a voice called from the glen. "I know you are there." "Dad!" I shouted, and once again burst down the mountainside to see my father. As I ran toward him, I heard sounds that stopped me, the sounds of branches and twigs breaking, of the flowers being crushed. Hordes were coming. For a long moment I stood wondering whether to meet Dad or run forever. I was self-sufficient. I could travel the world over, never needing a penny, never asking anything of anyone. I could cross to Asia in a canoe via the Bering Strait. I could raft to an island. I could go around the world on the fruits of the land. I started to run. I got as far as the gorge and turned back. I wanted to see Dad. I walked down the mountain to greet him and to face the people he had brought from the city to photograph me, interview me, and bring me home. I walked slowly, knowing that it was all over. I could hear the voices of the other people. They filled my silent mountain. Then I jumped in the air and laughed for joy. I recognized my 4-year-old brother's pleasure song. The family. Dad had brought the family. Every one of them. I ran, twisting and turning through the trees like a Cooper's hawk, and occasionally riding a free 50 feet downhill on an aspen sapling. "Dad, Mom!" I shouted as I came upon them along the stream bed, carefully picking their way through the raspberry bushes. Dad gave me a resounding slap, and Mother hugged me until she cried. John jumped on me. Jim threw me into the rushes. Mary sat on me. Alice put leaves in my hair. Hank pulled Jim off. Joan pulled me to my feet, and Jake bit my ankle. That cute little baby sister toddled away from me and cried. "Wow, all of New York," I said. "This is a great day for the Catskills." I led them proudly up the mountain, thinking about dinner and what I had that would go around. I knew how Mother felt when we brought in friends for dinner. As we approached the hemlock grove, I noticed that Dad was carrying a pack. He explained it as food for the first few days, or until I could teach John, Jim, Hank, and Jake how to live off the land. I winked at him. "But Dad, a Gribbly is not for the land." "What do you mean?" he shouted. "The Gribblies have had land for 3 generations. We pioneer. We open the land." He was almost singing. "And then we go to sea," I said. "Things have changed. Child labor laws. You can't take children to sea." I should have glowed over such a confession for Dad had I not been making furious plans as we climbed. Food, bed, chores. Dad, however, had since Christmas to outplan me. He strung up hammocks for everyone all through the forest. He never heard a happier bunch of kids. The singing and shouting and giggling sent the birds and wildlife deeper into the shadows. Even little Nina had a hammock, and though she was only a toddler, she cooed and giggled all by herself as she rocked between 2 aspens near the meadow. We ate Mother's fried chicken. Chicken is good. It tastes like chicken. I shall never forget that evening, and I shall never forget what Dad said. "Son, when I told your mother where you were, she said, 'Well, if he doesn't want to come home, then we'll bring home to him, and that's why we are all here.'" I was stunned. I was beginning to realize that this was not an overnight camping trip, but a permanent arrangement. Mother saw my expression and said, "When you are of age, you can go wherever you please. Until then, I still have to take care of you, according to all the law I can find." She put her arm around me, and we rocked ever so slightly. Besides, I am not a Gribbly. I am a Stewart, and the Stewarts loved the land. She looked at the mountain and at the meadow and the gorge, and I felt her squeeze into the earth and take root. The next day I took John, Jim, and Hank out into the mountain meadows with Frightful to see if we could not round up enough food to feed this city of people. We did pretty well. When we came back, there was Dad with 4x4s erected at the edge of the meadow, and a pile of wood that would have covered a barn. "Gosh, Dad," I cried, "what on earth are you doing?" "We are going to have a house," he said. I was stunned and hurt. "A house? You'll spoil everything," I protested. "Can't we all live in trees and hammocks?" "No, your mother said that she was going to give you a decent home, and in her way of looking at it, that means a roof and doors." She got awfully mad at those newspaper stories, inferring that she had not done her duty. But she did. I was almost at the point of tears. "She's a swell mother. What other boy has a mother who would let him do what I did?" I know, but a woman lives among her neighbors. Your mother took all those editorials personally, and this as if they were Mr. Brackett, Mrs. O'Brien speaking. The nation became her neighbors, and no one, not even," he hesitated, a catbird meowed, Not even that catbird is going to think that she neglected you. I was about to protest in a loud, strong voice when Mother's arm slipped around my shoulder. That's how it is until you're 18, Sam, she said, and that ended it.